What if I told you that one of the bloodiest wars in human history, World War I, might have ended 2 years earlier if not for a single error in a cipher? Not a battle, not a treaty, not a general's decision, but a broken piece of code, one that was supposed to change everything yet ended up changing nothing, or rather, delaying everything. By 1917, the world was exhausted. Millions dead, empires cracking at the seams, and morale crumbling on every front. And yet, the war dragged on, grinding, aimless, merciless. But behind the scenes, there was a glimmer, a chance, however small, that the war could end. Secret peace feelers were being exchanged. Enemies were talking, not publicly, not formally, but they were talking. And in the middle of that fragile thread of diplomacy stood a cipher, a German cipher transmitting a vital message. But the message didn't reach the right hands in time. Or rather, it did, but its meaning didn't. Because the cipher had a flaw so small that at first glance it seemed irrelevant. And yet, that flaw may have been the reason peace failed. The reason the war escalated. The reason America joined the fight. Today we're going to unravel a mystery that's been buried in the shadows of better-known events. A mystery of missed opportunities, misunderstood signals, and a code that should have ended a war, but didn't. Buckle up. Because what we're about to investigate might just change how you think about the Great War and the cost of a single silent mistake. To understand how a cipher could hold the fate of millions, we need to step into a world where every word matters and every code is a weapon. In 1917, Germany was in a desperate position. The war had turned into a brutal stalemate. The Western Front was a meat grinder chewing through lives for inches of land. The British blockade was slowly strangling the German economy, and starvation was creeping into everyday life. Germany needed an edge, a way to break the deadlock. And that's when they made a fateful decision. They would return to unrestricted submarine warfare. In simple terms, any ship, military or civilian, friend or neutral, that entered waters near Britain would be a target. Germany knew this would provoke the United States, but they had a plan. If they could keep America occupied, distracted, even delayed, then maybe, just maybe, they could win the war in Europe before the US could mobilize. So they turned to a man named Arthur Zimmermann, Germany's foreign secretary. It was Zimmermann who drafted a telegram, a secret diplomatic proposal sent to Mexico. The message offered a deal. If Mexico joined the war against the United States, Germany would help it reclaim lost territories: Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. On paper, it was bold, reckless even. But to the Germans, it was worth the gamble. The telegram was sent via secure channels, encrypted using Germany's most trusted diplomatic cipher, the kind of code that had worked dozens of times before. But this time was different, because the message didn't just go through German lines. It had to pass, believe it or not, through British-controlled cables. Yes, Germany actually sent its top-secret plan over cables it knew the British could access. Why? Because it believed the cipher was unbreakable. And because of diplomatic conventions, even enemies sometimes allowed coded messages to pass, assuming mutual diplomatic respect. But the British had other ideas. Unknown to the Germans, Britain had a secret code-breaking unit tucked away in a room known only as Room 40. And they had already cracked parts of the German cipher. When the Zimmermann telegram passed through their hands, they jumped on it. But here's where the real problem begins. Because what Room 40 decoded didn't entirely make sense. Words were out of place. Sentences read strangely. The message was incomplete, or rather mistranslated. Not because of British error, but because the German cipher was flawed. Somewhere in the process of encryption, the original telegram had been garbled. A few swapped numbers, a misaligned key, just enough to scramble key sections. And now the British had a half-understood, half-garbled version of a message that could change the course of the war, but not the proof they needed to use it. So they were faced with a dilemma. Do they reveal the telegram, knowing it might be dismissed as fake? Or do they try to reconstruct the truth before the moment passes? And the clock was ticking. The British needed a miracle, or at least a cleaner version of the message. So they turned to a risky solution. Instead of using the intercepted version that passed through British hands, they looked for a second copy of the same telegram sent through a different channel, and they found it in Mexico. You see, the German embassy in Washington had received the Zimmermann telegram and retransmitted it to their counterparts in Mexico City, using a second cipher, an older one, less secure but easier to decode. British intelligence agents managed to obtain a copy of this second version through covert surveillance and cooperation with American cable companies. And now, for the first time, they had both versions, the garbled one from Europe and the clearer one from Mexico. It was like comparing two damaged puzzle pieces, each incomplete on its own, but together, revealing the full picture. But there was still one problem. If Britain revealed the telegram publicly, Germany would realize their ciphers had been compromised. That would mean new encryption systems cutting off British codebreakers from a priceless stream of intelligence. Even worse, it could cause a political backlash. The US might be offended to learn that Britain had been spying on its diplomatic cables. So the British did what any good strategist would do. They covered their tracks. They claimed that the telegram had been stolen in Mexico. Technically true, but misleading. Then they handed it over to the American government. When President Wilson read the decrypted message, he was stunned. Was this really authentic? Germany offering US territory to a foreign power? The White House demanded proof. And here's the twist. The Germans gave it to them. Arthur Zimmermann, perhaps out of arrogance, perhaps out of strategic miscalculation, confirmed the telegram's authenticity in a press conference. He said, yes, Germany had made that proposal. And yes, they were serious. With that single admission, the fuse was lit. But now let's zoom in on the detail we almost missed, the original cipher error. Because here's where it gets strange. That broken encryption, the one that produced the garbled message in the first place, was exactly what slowed the British down. Had the message arrived cleanly, decoded clearly, and been passed to the Americans even a few weeks earlier, it might have changed the timing of everything. Why? Because in early 1917, President Wilson was still advocating peace. He had just delivered a speech calling for peace without victory, trying to broker a settlement to end the war diplomatically. But as the weeks passed, Germany began sinking American ships. The Zimmermann telegram surfaced, and by April, the US was at war. So here's the question. What if that original cipher had worked correctly? What if the British had been able to act faster, reveal the telegram sooner, and give Wilson the leverage to force peace talks before things spiraled further? Could a few days, maybe even hours, have tipped the balance? Could a bug in a cipher have added 2 more years to the world's most senseless war? Let's follow the dominoes. April 6, 1917. The United States declares war on Germany. It's a turning point, not immediate, not explosive, but decisive. American troops don't arrive en masse until 1918, but from that moment on, Germany knows the clock is ticking. Every battle, every decision is now weighed against the looming force of a fully mobilized American war machine. And here's where the cascade begins. With America entering the war, Germany doubles down. It escalates submarine warfare. It cracks down internally, and most critically, it closes the door on potential peace talks. Because before the Zimmermann telegram went public, there were still diplomatic feelers being extended, especially through neutral nations like Sweden, Switzerland, and the Vatican. But once the US is on the path to war, those channels shut. Wilson's vision of a brokered peace without victors, dead. Britain and France, now backed by a rising superpower, dig in. Germany, realizing it can't win a long war, gambles on a short one, launching a massive spring offensive in 1918, hoping to break Allied lines before the Americans arrive in force. It nearly works. Nearly. But it fails. The Allies counterattack, American troops pour in, morale shifts, and by November 1918, the German Empire collapses, the Kaiser abdicates, an armistice is signed. But let's backtrack. What if none of this had happened? What if the Zimmermann telegram had arrived cleanly, swiftly decoded, and presented to Wilson before Germany resumed full-scale submarine warfare? What if the president had held that card in hand while still advocating peace? It's not fiction. We know from diplomatic archives that both sides were probing for a way out in early 1917. The war was costing too much, leaders were exhausted, economies were buckling. A properly timed exposure of German duplicity before hostilities resumed might have shocked Berlin into restraint and given Wilson leverage to pull the major powers to the negotiating table. Instead, because of a faulty cipher and a delayed decoding process, the telegram's impact was misaligned with events on the ground. It went from potential tool of de-escalation to casus belli, a domino falling just out of sequence, yet hitting all the others just the same. And the price? 2 more years of slaughter, millions more dead, and the groundwork laid for something even darker. Because the delayed end to World War I didn't just prolong suffering, it made the peace that followed far more fragile. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. When the guns finally fell silent on November 11th, 1918, the world exhaled, but the peace that followed was anything but stable. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't a carefully negotiated end. It was a rushed, lopsided reckoning. The Allies, exhausted and emboldened, dictated terms. Germany, humiliated and cornered, signed with a pen dipped in resentment. And that resentment didn't vanish, it fermented. The harsh reparations, the economic collapse, the national humiliation, they all planted seeds. Seeds that would grow into something far darker just 2 decades later. But here's the part we rarely question. Would Versailles have looked different if the war had ended in early 1917 instead of late 1918? It's not just speculation. If the US had stayed neutral and helped broker peace, as Wilson originally intended, there might have been no sweeping punishment, no crushed economy, no desperate search for a scapegoat inside Germany. And without that chain reaction, no fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. The broken cipher that delayed the Zimmermann telegram by just weeks didn't just prolong the war. It helped shape the world that came after. That's the moment of clarity. That's our eureka. Not all turning points are battles. Some are invisible, some are quiet. Some sit on desks in code rooms buried in numeric sequences and flawed encryption keys. The cipher wasn't meant to fail, but it did. And in doing so, it jammed the gears of diplomacy just long enough for the machine of war to keep turning. That's the true cost of a broken code. Not just a lost message, but millions of lost futures. So next time we look at history's grand events, the declarations, the invasions, the treaties, remember to look for the quieter triggers, the misplaced words, the delayed messages, the butterfly wings. Because sometimes it's not the cannon blast that changes the world, it's the whisper that came too late. If this unraveling of hidden history made you see the Great War in a new light, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who thinks they know how history works, and subscribe to the Domino Effect, where we dig into the forgotten causes behind unforgettable consequences. Because the past didn't happen in straight lines, it happened in chains of dominoes, and we're here to find the first one.